know, you had identified needs initially, you had signed into this. We all don't know how this is gonna evolve. We don't know if it will be the end by end of June or July. And you know, things have to keep on going. You have staff, you know, the human resources that you've developed and built their capacity. You know, you don't just bolt them out of your organizations or programs and all that. Then also, a lot of times they still need for things around due diligence, you know, because there's an emergency or things have changed a little bit, does not mean that now we have to flout our policies, our manuals and procedures because we have an emergency. The other thing that sometimes we need to do is also to focus on our internal processes and wellness. I also had an opportunity to talk to a grantor yesterday, and what they told me is that how they're approaching this is that they told organizations that receive funding from them that can you focus on your staff now? Culturally, especially in an African setting, it is the parents who provide. They go out to work, they go out to you know, they go out and bring back something, especially the mothers and the fathers. But now these people have to stay at home and tell their children and the people around them that, you know, we are working from home. So it's a new thing. And how does this merge or mate with things like work-life balance at the same time you're achieving your objectives? Then as we move forward, because of those bigger objectives that we already have, it is also imperative that we celebrate the little wins, you know, the small details, because you might not go full cycle and achieve those objectives or those numbers or whichever things you had planned in your work plan when you're studying. So we should be at liberty to relook at that, adjust projects based on scenarios, and these scenarios again develop them jointly. Both the people you serve, engage the donors, get coherence. Don't just jump and do things and then you're gonna get into a disallowed cost sometimes, and you know, you've not met your objectives, and how you'd even justify your salaries, you know, or your overhead costs and all that. Then some other area that we look at is also about innovation at the place of work. How do we leverage on things like technology? I've seen a lot in terms of how we do monitoring and evaluation, especially remotely. Are we able to do interviews over the phone the way we normally do sometimes in fragile contexts? Are we able to you know, how do we do monitoring? How do we share this information? How are we going to do reporting and all that? Then also we've seen a lot of work being done by the government. The government has strengthened the health systems a little bit. They have their reporting structures now. They have their surveillance teams. What do we learn from those structures that the government has come up with as a way of benchmarking on how we do our own implementation? So that is something to think about. And I would hand over to Mumbi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom. So I'm just taking notes because there's so much insight coming from both you and Clement. And just a reminder to the participants that we have logged on, please send your questions through the chat. You can send them at any time during the webinar, but we'll pack them and address the questions in the last 30-45 minutes. But please keep sending them as we engage. What I'm hearing is a resounding push to strengthen our relationship management during this time. Our relationship management with our stakeholders, our donors from whom we've received the funds, and from the communities, the beneficiaries that we're working with, and with the government. Also hearing that what's coming from the ground is that there's a lot of flexibility. This is a global challenge. It's affecting everybody. And so people are being a bit more flexible. The donors are flexible, but they want to be engaged on the decisions we want to take at the institutional level. So it's not all gloom from what I'm hearing from Clement and Tom. It's not all gloom. The lights can stay on. We just have to be a bit more proactive, a bit more innovative on how we can keep activities going on the ground. But I think there must be some impediments that are emerging as we continue to implement. And I'd like to hear what are some of the impediments that you have seen in your space, and what can organizations do to cope with this new normal? We can probably start with Clement.
Thank you, Mumbi, once more. I think one of the key things dealing with a situation like now is two things. One, we may want to do things the way we have done them before, the traditional ways of doing it, or we may also want to get into the challenges of innovation, where we start talking about innovation envy. What do I mean by innovation envy? Where you'll want to come in and say, me too, because organizations are moving this direction, then you will also want to say that my organization is also taking this direction. Probably also another challenge and about innovation is from where I sit, from where I stand, there is no clear guidance, there is no framework for decision making at this time. Okay, it had started showing up, but it is now going to show up even more. If you wait for directions from your boss, then what that means is that I don't need you. You go and ask your boss, so what are we going to do? Your boss tells you, just figure it out yourself. FIO, figure it out yourself. So we now have FIO sapiens, people who are supposed now to figure it out themselves to get out of the problems, because everyone is in it. We talked about, and Tom talked about communication, collaboration. We need solidarity. We need to figure it out ourselves. What do you think we need to do for us to offload the burden? Now, one of my fears, and from my small little example, is before the crisis, and I normally come to the office every day, before the crisis, I used to fuel my car 2.5 to 3 times in a month. Okay, now I'm fueling my car 1 time in a month. Okay, has anything changed? Most likely, not anything has. Most likely, things have not changed. So, and this is one of the challenges that I'm posing to you when we are talking about all this and we are talking about these nice things, just to put a perspective of what is likely to happen. Okay, now organizations are moving. You may want to say that we are just doing quick fixes or keeping the lights on, but the donor, they will be compressed also or financially constrained, and when they come back, will be like, but you operated for 6 months. Okay, so we are going to see some of these working from home practices coming into play. But then again, also from ourselves, and talking about the impediments and some of the solutions that we have, because we have so many things that are happening, but now where we are, we need creative thinking, and creative thinking is not about arts and whatever, it's also applicable in sciences and decision making. So we also need creative leadership to be in a position where you can even disrupt yourself. And this is what COVID is telling us. We need to disrupt ourselves completely from an organization perspective, but you cannot disrupt an organization unless you have disrupted yourself. So this is a place where this COVID is telling us to disrupt ourselves. So you become the disruptor and also the incumbent. If you don't disrupt yourself as an organization or as an individual, someone is coming to disrupt you. Now, I talked about creative thinking and I talked about creative designers. All these things come to fail because we need a place where we start applying human-centered approach or design thinking for us to be able to understand the next move in our organization. So if you bring in a consultant and there is no involvement in your staff, who are the frontliners who determine the future of the organization, then what is likely to happen is that you are going to get disappointment. Okay, but can you do creative thinking using traditional methods? Where when I'm talking about traditional methods now here, I'm talking about critical thinking, where nowadays we are taught to be critical thinkers, but now critical thinking does not apply here, because critical thinking is thinking about thinking, and it doesn't apply. We need to think into the future. We need to start by dreaming. Okay, we dream into the future. We say, what if COVID is here for 7 years? What if? What if? Then we create scenarios like Tom said, so we can create like 3 or 4 scenarios that we can have, and that we can now also be able to share with our development partners and also with our communities, because part of why NGOs exist, and it has not happened, and I can testify to this and I can speak about this, it has not happened because we have not focused heavily on community empowerment. The moment we start talking about community empowerment, and community empowerment is not complicated. Well, it is complicated, of course, because they are human and many other factors. But when you start focusing on community empowerment, you are starting to look into livelihoods and resilience, okay? And that encompasses everything. If you have empowered communities, and that's why I started by talking about locally led initiatives. If we start now, because this is where we have to start, locally led initiatives, then we'll be able to dream with the communities, we'll be able to experiment with the communities, we'll be able to think and generally gravitate towards a solution. And that will be a solution that is coming from the communities and will be adopted by communities. And this is also a place where we're also trying to look at how we partner with probably our potential competition. So we start looking at collaboration. How do we partner with people who seemingly are our competitors? And then the other element that I'm also looking at is most of the organizations have not been in a position to show value, okay? So this is also the time at the moment where we start looking at how then do we start using the knowledge that we have accumulated over time to be able to share with our development partners and to be able to say that now we are bringing in shared value. We are trying to say this is what you have given and this is also what we are giving back, okay? And if there is time, I'll talk a little bit more about this when we start looking at some of the digital innovations that we can come up to at least be able to say we are in solidarity, we are in it together, because there is no tourism now. And we can also create all sorts of things for us to be able to say that we have co-created, we have co-designed, we have co-owned with our development partners, and that will be able now to make communities more resilient and livelihoods secured for the future. Thanks, Mumbi.
Thanks, Clement. Wow, COVID is disruptive, but we are learning that sometimes disruption is just what is needed. We've seen it with other disruptive technologies like Uber and Airbnb that came in, and unfortunately this one is coming in with some fatalities. But I like that you've said we should start recognizing the adjustments that we need to make. It's time for creative thinking, not critical thinking. I love that. It's time for collaboration. Please say it again.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. It's time for collaboration, which is so true, and also for bottom-up solutions actually coming from the ground, and we are seeing that happening in the world today. Solutions coming from the most unlikely places, and so it means there's a future. There really is. So I'll ask a question that is simple but yet very loaded to Tom. What do you see as the future?
Thank you, Mumbi, and thank you for to all the participants who are still listening in. Now, this is a tricky situation, but life is going on. So the most basic question one would also ask themselves, do we need to reinvent the wheel? Do we need to reinvent the wheel in terms of how we work? All of us care about the objectives of grant making. Communities care about that. Donors care about that. So we are in this together, kind of. It's not going away today. It's not going away tomorrow. Sometimes we react because we don't know. And I had an opportunity to read something from a Nigerian pastor who was trying to debunk some of the myths around COVID-19 and the closure of schools, public transport, churches, and mosques. And that was in 1918 when we had the flu. And what I noticed from that, there was a lot of research material online that has been documented from that time in 1918. What exactly happened? It's the same thing that again is happening now. They closed mosques, they practiced social distancing, people stayed home, and everything. So in terms of also work environment, or what I see as some of the things that we could possibly do in the future. One is that we need to improve the work environment through adoption of concepts like agility in programming, like agile methodology or concepts in programming. We need to embrace that more. And as I've said earlier, is that donors also care about those objectives. Donors care about those outcomes. Communities care about those outcomes. As grant implementers, we also care about those outcomes and objectives. So why don't we also do some trial and error in terms of what we do at the work environment? Some agility, embrace those agile concepts, trial and error, some little flexibility on how things are done, and we'll be able to move forward. The second thing is really also to focus on mental health awareness, wellness of your staff. And I think there was a question that was posed by David Courier from a legal perspective and being emphatic to your staff, which is the best practice, weighing from pay cuts and or deferred payment cuts or to laying off staff. This is a huge struggle for businesses whose revenue generating projects have been stalled. Even if COVID-19 ends sometimes in the future, or we return a little bit to normalcy in quotes, we still need this staff. You've built capacity of this staff. We still need those relationships. So how are we going to take care of it? And I said from my conversations this week as part of preparations for this, the both good and the bad, again in quotes, it's not for me to judge, but different approaches. Donors, many of them have told implementing agencies or grantees that can you focus on your staff first? Because in one way or the other, we have to look at new ways of doing something. Like there's need for that continuity. There's need to plug into what is already going on. Issues of those transitions. Would staff look at themselves as victims? Would we as organizations look at ourselves as victims, as implementers? Would donors look at themselves as victims? What about culture and productivity? How do we do things and all that? And then issues around new habits. If I'm working from home, or if we're leveraging on technology, definitely there could be some layoffs, or there would be a need for human interface. How do we do it in terms of adapting well to the future and COVID? Then another thing is to look at issues around performance, rethinking performance measurement and measuring tools. A lot of times, especially with productivity, we look at numbers a lot, but even things to do with soft approaches to measurement of productivities, things around appreciation, how do we do that? Are you appreciating your staff? They're able to work from home, you know, and you know, in spite of everything, that's their private space. That's a place for wellness and family. But now we've also introduced into that and how I do that. So we need to rethink that and have in mind, you know, issues around culture and productivity and all that. Rethinking performance frameworks and how we measure that. Then there's also the issue of leadership, even in our organizations. You know, for me, I would look at it this way. A lot of times we think that the donor is the boss or the grantor is the boss. They call the shots and all that. But in terms of leadership that we need to rethink, is that, you know, we are implementers, we are implementing partners. Those are our counterparts, only that they're at a different level. We are helping them fulfill certain objectives through activities that we implement every day. So it is a relationship. So continuous and sustained engagement with all stakeholders. Still, that is the way to go. Participatorily, you know, think through things together. We are in this together. Communities are affected, donors are affected, governments are affected, implementers are affected, or grantees are affected. So we need to really think that it is more of a relationship, because we have to build back better. We have to emerge out of this stronger. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to lose everything. Then there could be need to adjust a few things, you know, adjustments in terms of how we're making decisions, even through use of technology and all that. Then there's also need to look at technology and data in decision making. You know, people who did a little bit of modeling had predicted that Africa would really suffer, and mostly the third world, through this COVID pandemic, and that, you know, will experience death. But what we've seen in most other places, we've seen Europe as a continent suffer more. When you look at all those numbers, you know, in terms of Europe as a continent, and then look at America as a continent, you know, everyone has literally suffered. And we're not out of the woods yet. So what is our scenario? How are we adapting? I think I saw on the internet recently what they were doing in Indonesia last month. They realized that people feared ghosts. You know, they had all these myths about ghosts at night and all that. And what they did, they painted people white with whitewash on their faces, and then they put a shroud on them, a white shroud on their heads. And these people were walking out at night. In Kenya, and especially in Kenya, we have the curfew, 7 to 5 a.m. in the morning. And then you also have the cessation of movement around some areas and all that. So these are local solutions. Clement mentioned that, you know, people would want to work directly, donors would want to work directly with local implementers. And local implementers would also want to work directly with donors, or donors would want to work directly with communities and all that. So let us look at some of these homegrown solutions. And that case of Indonesia, where they painted people white to resemble ghosts or something to scare away people, so that people stay indoors at night. And it was working for them. But you and I know very well that those are not ghosts. So local solutions, leveraging on technology and data in decision making, looking at both external factors and internal factors as we do that. That is the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is the future. That is the future. Thank you. We've also seen, just to add, there also been very little support, especially for SMEs. SMEs are actually at the backbone of our economy. When we're doing livelihoods programming, for instance, the livelihood programming again feeds into the SME, because we want to sustain the bigger population and the bigger majority of the population within all these countries and all that. So the case of Kenya, we've seen very little government support for SMEs, but we've seen other things going on. And this is part of the economy. So still that reinforces the point that we are in this together. If one side sinks, you know, the rest also suffer. So that is the thinking and mentality I'd really wish and appreciate that we use as we approach donors, we approach our communities, and we approach our grantees. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll just pick up from your last sentence, which was the approach that we should use when engaging our beneficiaries, our donors, and all the other partners that we work with, the actors in the different sectors that we work. So picking from one of the questions from a participant, they ask, who is the boss in this situation? Who do we manage? Who do we prioritize managing? Do we prioritize managing our government, local government or national government? Do we prioritize managing the donor? Do we prioritize managing the beneficiary? Considering there are multiple players and multiple interests, how do we rank those interests, or do we even rank them? I think I'll open this up to any of you, whoever will go first in answering, and we could probably hear from both of you on the best approach to that.
Okay, while Tom takes a sip of something, let me go first. I think in this business, the boss is the community that we serve. So the most important partner that we might need to manage mostly is the community that we serve. And I'm going to continue from where I left when I talked about having some digital innovations on how to manage this, because what we need now here, we need knowledge management. We have worked for 30 years in a certain community. Sometimes back, or even now, the donors are stressed of seeing the same photos that have been used continuously on borrowing that leads, or even like begging, right? But now I think it would be a place where we start showing solidarity, where we go into those communities and we do knowledge management. We start seeking on how to transform than how to transact. We've done a lot in those communities, so we need to seek how to transform than how to transact. The community also need to understand our model of operation and their deeper involvement in the whole ecosystem. So what does that mean? This means that we need to focus on, when I talked about knowledge management, then we need to start looking at what have we achieved so far? So how has knowledge moved from stage to stage? And we need to document that and profile that. And I think this will be a key way of trying also to manage the donor or the grantor or the funder as we go into the next phase. We say, your X amount of money, before we were like this. Your X amount of money has led this community to be like this. And you can show those boys or those girls or those women in the communities trying to celebrate some of the things that they have achieved based as a result of the funding that have been. And then now you create the next story, or you create the next story. And the next story is not going to be, it's going to be historical. It's going to be based on history. But the next story is going to be the myth. The next story is going to be the myth. So we have to start now to be daydreamers. We start dreaming about how that community is going to look like post-COVID, how that community is going to look like in the next 3 years, in the next whatever number of years. So when we create that myth, then this is the place of convergence with the donor now, because I think this is the conversation that the donor wants to see. They will want to say, okay, we've been touched, this is what has happened, and this is what has been happening, but we are not going to ask the money directly. We will tell them, like what Tom has been putting it, we are in it together, okay? Some of the donors that we have gone to are mourning. They are grieving because they lost their dear ones, okay? Well, I was looking at something from Harvard Business Publishing, and one of the things I saw is that it would be the worst thing that you just go to the donor and sentence number 1 is, can you give me? So you create the story, then after you create the story, then the next thing that happens is now you can tell them, this is what has happened. And like we have seen the deaths in in the Western world. Probably there are some people who have even written wills for their money to go to charity, but you cannot access that money. It's not very automatic that you are going to get that money. You have to create a story of how you are going to get that money and how you are going to manage both the stakeholders on this side, who are the recipients, and the givers on the other side. So that's my small contribution for now.
Thank you, Clement. One of the places that this COVID has found us was at a point where we were raising funds for new cycles of implementation, new strategies, etc. And as institutions, we are grappling with, do we continue to fundraise during this epidemic? Are there any people who are giving out donor funds during this time, or have all donors prioritized local financing? And so probably we can hear from Tom on what he's been seeing around fundraising. What are there still opportunities out there? And we can tie it in with a question I'm seeing coming in from Christine. Thank you, Christine, asking how you can protect funds that had been set aside for capital investments. How can you protect those funds? And right now, where institutions are trying to pull funds from whatever sources to finance operational costs, how can those funds be protected? So 2 questions there for you, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for such insight, both Mumbi and Clement. Now, as I'd said before, is that we are in this together. Basically, everyone is affected. I remember I was working at the Ebola response, which was as deadly as Corona is right now. I remember I was in Senegal supporting West Africa operations. That time we had a closure of the airspace. We only had humanitarian flights supporting Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, through Senegal and all that. And, there was cessation of movement, airspace closed and all that. And there was a lot of goodwill. There was a lot of funding that came in, both to the government in terms of labor-intensive public works. You remember in Sierra Leone, we had programs like safe and dignified burials, for people who died of Ebola at that time. In some countries, they adopted things like cremation, to get rid of this completely. And all that. But now the situation is slightly different. We also saw Zika virus that really affected certain places around the world. And then we had Ebola in Congo most recently. It's still there. The war is almost won. We saw another emergency. We saw the Rohingya response in Bangladesh and Myanmar. We saw the Mozambique, the typhoon the other day that affected parts of Mozambique and some other Southern African countries. And it was a lot easier. Like, just direct funding to some locations because other people are okay. But it's different. The US, which is one of the major donors, even to the UN system, be it WHO, be it the UNWFP, UNHCR, and all these other people has been affected. Italy, equally affected. Canada, equally affected. So everyone is suffering. So therefore, what could be some of the possible ways we go around this? One, sometimes when it looks impossible, you hibernate, just the way we do with operations every day. If things are tough out there, you don't venture out. Just the same way we are working from home, a lot of us now. You're staying indoors, you're keeping it low, practicing social distancing, limiting movement out there and all that so that you don't expose yourself. It's a near similar approach that would also take with donors. But again, we have what we call contingency planning. That has been there. I'm not sure if we've not, no country, no agency, nobody has ever prepared for anything like this. I'm sure they've had some contingency funds, and this goes well with scenario building. What possible things could happen. And I'd give an example here very fast. When we had the post-election violence in Kenya, I was working with one of the local organizations, and this local organization was heavily funded for ICC preparations by ICC. They gave us a lot of funding. And one of the things was like, by the time they were confirming from the original list that we had of 10 indictees, we expected that there could be an escalation of conflict in places like the Rift Valley, around Nairobi, and other places. So we had all these scenarios mapped out on possible things that could happen or go wrong. Those are contingency funds, and there was no violence. When the list of 6 or 4 was confirmed, there was no violence at all. What do? You had staff doing preparations, you had prepositioned in those locations in case of mass movement or translocation of people. What do? So, again, is where we have the engagement, based on these scenarios, talk as openly as possible with the donors, prioritize what you can. The same question that was asked earlier, who is most important here? It's the beneficiary, the people we serve, the majority of the population. Those are the people we prioritize. And sometimes we also prioritize minorities, especially when they are vulnerable. Care homes, the people who have lost productivity because of restriction in movements and all that. Those are the people we prioritize. So there is no right or wrong answer, right or wrong approach here. But, rethink ways of doing this. Also, cut down on activities like this question that has been asked here. How do you protect funds, the funds saved from capital investment from being used to bridge operation cost and all that? You can bring down your operation costs, by cutting down on non-essential services and operations at some time, so that you ensure your survival. After that, the way we do with the grants, we normally have a corrective action plan. Right now, we are planning for 6 months after and all that. We also saw it. I was talking to somebody from a fintech here in Kenya, in Nairobi, and what they told me they did, especially when we had the elections in Kenya in 2017, by Q2 of the following year, they had recovered. But initially they had projected that they would not be able to recover in good time. So we look at the scenarios. Businesses are reopening. Things are coming back. Staff who are sent on leave, we maintain them somehow. But now, how do we do this? So essential services is just like where you're surviving on very little energy, just so that you are alive, and then you can live to fight another day. For me, that's it. It's not a magic bullet, a silver bullet in this case, but then we can scale down our operations to an extent where, we just remain with the structure, and then after that, we'll be able to pick up and build back better. I also saw that with the Ebola response in West Africa. Most of that operation was funded by USAID. I know there were other donors who did that, but after that, what was important is that all of us remain alive, and then we're able to build back better tomorrow. That's what I would recommend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I see a question coming in, and is related to also a question that was asked during the registration. We are living in an era where there's a lot of restrictions on movement and physical engagement. And we're also seeing that most towns that are getting locked down are in the capital, which is where the organizations are based, and the communities we serve are based outside of the capital. This, of course, is putting a strain on the continued implementation of our activities, but also on the monitoring of progress. So the question is, how can we remotely continue to monitor the activities on the ground? And I think I'll let whoever will go first take it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me just jump in there quickly. One, we've seen the concepts of remote monitoring. Mostly we use that in fragile contexts or where accessibility is an issue when implementing projects or programs. So it comes in handy. You can always have maybe somebody with access on the ground, use available e-tools, be they mobile phones, be they telephone conversations and all that to do monitoring. Two, we've also seen a lot in terms of leveraging of technology. You can, nowadays we use even drones. If you're looking at yields, quite well, there are different things we do. And then two, we also sometimes negotiate for access. Mm-hmm. This morning I talked to somebody implementing projects around Limuru town, and she was not able to get access to beneficiaries they needed. It's called case OVC, where they're implementing a project funded by USAID, targeting orphans and vulnerable children. And it's a whole lot of things they do. They look at, they do health monitoring, they do, they monitor a lot of things at the household level. They have some livelihoods component for caregivers and all that. And it's difficult. And what you told me when you got to the roadblocks is that the offices manning the roadblocks would only accept maybe people in a government vehicle or something. So she had to do a letter from her organization, have it signed by their superiors and all that, and now had to explain the intention and why they're doing that at that roadblock, and she was able to get access to these people because this is real life. Yes, sometimes we negotiate for access. It is possible. My experience in Myanmar, as long as you had a health sticker on your vehicle, you are allowed to even visit those rebel-infested areas, in Kachin, up the hills, and all that. So sometimes we do that, remote monitoring, and sometimes we also negotiate for accessibility, those two ways. And then thirdly, sometimes in terms of looking at the ultimate outcomes or intended outcomes or objectives, we focus on milestones, the little achievements, that process, almost like process monitoring, but what is it that we've been able to achieve as we go forward that we can easily monitor. And monitoring, participatory monitoring, it's not by me as an implementer, it's not by the community alone, it's not by the donor alone, but it's a responsibility for all of us. So we help each other. The mantra being, we are in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Clement, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so this may be a hard one, and I hope you will also be able to take it as it is, and it's not gospel or truth. So one of the other things as we do this, it also comes into a time where we need to rethink our programming, okay? We need to embrace constraints. I talked about dreaming, experimenting, thinking, and gravitating to a solution. Mm-hmm. Now, we need to think about a world we are working in a situation where we have no money, we have no skills, and we have no time. As human beings, you will need friction. We'll need friction, and this friction will come in terms of no time, no money, no funding. And that's why funded programs sometimes fail as opposed to bootstrapped startups. Okay, and we might find ourselves getting to the place of being like a startup. So we need to be able to go up the ladder to get today, and then go down, and then start up again. We go up, we start again. We go up, we come down, we start again. Okay, so we need to figure out how to do with nothing, because We have been sometimes when I was working with my former employer, there was a time when we were talking about banning money. We need to ban these funds, but I don't think that is applicable anytime now. There is a time when donors were coming in and we are saying that we have this now. How can you spend this money? I think now the coin needs to change, and we say this is the problem that we need to solve, because we have gone into the communities, we have worked into the communities, and then we come back again and we say this is what we need. Now, based on the question about capital investments and so forth and so forth, I think this is a situation which is understood again also in conversation with our funders and all our key stakeholders, because we failed because we do not communicate adequately to our key stakeholders. So we also need, it might be a providential step that we are in, or a period that we are in, and we are saying we also need to step back and grow. So this is our time where we are stepping back and we are growing, okay? We need this time. This is a unique time that we are in, and nobody can explain why we are in this time. So it might be also a time for us to rest, but you see, we cannot rest. The human mind and the human body have not been created to just sleep. This time is a time to rethink, is a time to refocus, is a time to relaunch again, and then to aim what we need to say our success looks like. So if we are talking about securing our future, we are talking about securing our communities, we now need to get in and have conversation. The guys who are locked down in the communities, now this is the time to empathize with the communities, to discuss, to do KYC, know my community. You know your community better. And then also part of what you are saying about, about we are not able to move from where we are headquartered in Nairobi to I don't know where. Then this probably in my own thinking shows that the delivery model might be wrong. So we may also need to start rethinking about our delivery models. The Gemba, where it is happening, is in the community. And we find ourselves here in the city, we find ourselves here in the main towns, we find ourselves in the regional offices, in the headquarters, but the Gemba is where the community is. We need to smell like the communities. We need to be, for us to be able to prosper, we may also need to think about our delivery models that will be able to take us to where we want to go to. So this is a time also where the manager, if you are the program manager or you are the director and you have a program in some place called Kisapuk in Kajiado, probably that's where you need to be, not in Nairobi. Okay, yeah, so that's my little contribution and some of the things that the organizations need to start thinking about, and also inclusion of the planet as one of the key stakeholders. And we have seen this coming up, especially with the Sustainable Development Goals. How then do we need to take care of the planet? We don't take care of the planet because we have, I don't know whether you call them hard tops or what you call them from Gilbrata. So we always moving from Nairobi to Makueni, from Makueni to Mukurweini, from Nairobi to wherever, and we are contaminating the planet. So it's also high time that we start rethinking how we engage with the communities and how we partner also, because we'll be able to understand their problems more appropriately when we are in the communities ourselves.
Thank you, Clement. There's so much we can talk about, and there's so much to talk about really as drivers of development in our country and also on the continent. There's a lot of readjustment that is being required of us now, and we cannot fail the communities we serve. As you both have said, those should be our top priority, and if we don't keep going, they will also suffer. So unfortunately, we have to stop there today. It was a short webinar, 1.5 hours, not enough time, we barely scratched the surface. Strathmore, as they look into the future, have also planned a broader program in July I think the details on the exact week of July will be shared on the website. So to our participants, please visit the Strathmore website to see when they have scheduled an 8-day-long virtual grants management program that we can all benefit from and dig deeper into these issues that we've just touched on today. The meeting has been recorded, and the recording will also be shared on the Strathmore website in a few days. Please visit and download so that you can keep engaging with the content that has been discussed today. I want to thank all our participants for being part of this webinar today, for sparing the time for joining us, and for the questions you've asked, for the engagement. Thank you. To our very able panelists, so much insight we've received from you, Clement and Tom. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing with us what's happening, not just in the country, but globally in the different continents that we can borrow from here in Kenya. As part, this webinar was part of a larger series of webinars that Strathmore is running around navigating the pandemic. And tomorrow, episode 7 happens. Please register, plug in. It will be focusing on SMEs and COVID-19, reimagining to survive and thrive. I think the time is 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and you're welcome to join in. Thank you everybody for participating in today's webinar. Have a lovely afternoon and a blessed rest of the week. Thank you.